Welcome to High Truths on Drugs and Addiction, where national experts bring you facts and answer your questions. I'm your host, Dr. Roneet Lev, an emergency and addiction doctor who has worked at the White House and still practices on the front lines. Right here on High Truths, you will learn from experts, hear stories from the emergency department, and listen to people who have struggled from addiction. Each episode, we will answer questions from you, our listeners. To learn more about the show, submit a question, access educational material, or even take a quiz, you can visit us on hightruths.com. All right, so Roneet Lev on High Truths, and this is a reverse interview. Instead of me inviting guests and learning about them, I have Dr. Ken Druck interviewing me about the different things that I know and the questions that he may have and other people may have. And so welcome, Ken. So wonderful to see you.
Roneet, it's so like you to have a program featuring the work and bringing out the best in everybody else. And when you and I last talked, I said, you know, with the work that you have done and are doing in our community and in the world, I want to interview you because more of your work and what you have to say about the critical issues of our time needs to get out there. We need a higher level of, yes, we need higher truths, a higher level of education and awareness about the choices we're making, the consequences of those choices, and the opportunity ahead of us to really absorb what's going on in the world today. And so I said, let me interview you. And you were kind enough to say, all right, Ken, I'll do it.
We'll try it.
I'm in. Yeah. Yeah. So we're reversing roles. And the first question that I have for you is, what's it like? I know you've been interviewed 100 times, both on camera and audio and off camera, but what's it like for you? And what do you feel is the opportunity of this moment of somebody interviewing you and giving you an open forum to share some of what you've been doing? And where does that sharing start? With what subject? What conversation?
That's an interesting question. Well, first of all, so thank you again. I can't thank you enough for asking me and getting this out. I do feel that my area of expertise is in addiction medicine and emergency medicine, and that I have a view from the front lines of what's happening with drugs in society, actually everything in society, because the world is a stage and people in the ER have the front seat. And also a different perspective by looking at the medical examiner's office and seeing why people died. And I think no one's gone through person by person by person, 250 people, and looked at them and all their prescriptions before they died, and to really understand how can we prevent this. And I think that there's a lot to learn from that research that I call the death diaries in order to prevent deaths.
So when you think about what's the greatest opportunity for this sharing and for the sharings that you have been doing, and now we're in a public forum and more people have an opportunity to tune in and to listen to you, what's the greatest opportunity? What's the greatest benefit of what you have to share? What might happen that's good for all of us
to know about? I think it comes to protecting your health and keeping your health. We want that in all of our lives. But protecting our health when it comes to drugs, both prescription and illicit drugs. And there's a lot of information out there that tells you that, this is healthy, this is good for you. But if there's not a coordination of your medicines that you get from a great doctor, and if you're adding illicit drugs to that or alcohol, then the consequences are grave. and as I've seen from the research from the medical examiner's office.
And not only are you speaking to people about their own health, are you talking to me about my children's health, my grandkids, and how to kind of set the table for our kids to understand, to know there's a consequence for what might otherwise appear to be casual social acceptance. We've gone through a century of, or centuries of, lubricating with alcohol and telling young men that's the way to be a man. You man up. That's all the beer commercials and all the sports and so on.
Right.
We've seen how that happens, what the marketing, what the infusion into consciousness is for alcohol. What would you say the opportunity is for us with our kids and our grandkids?
Well, the opportunity is multi-generational, just like you said. Although in youth, we know that younger people are more susceptible to addiction. So if someone is using any type of drug, whether it's alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, or any illicit drug, before their brain is done growing, their chance of developing an addiction is 4 to 7 times higher than if you or I were using that drugs. So while addiction and problems with drugs, crosses, all the generations, all ethnicities. When you're younger, before the scientific age of being an adult is more 25 or 27. It's not a legal age, it's a science age of when you're done, your brain is done growing, you are more susceptible.
So if I'm a parent listening to this, or a grandpa like me, and I'm saying, how do I approach that conversation without sounding like the guy who's just raining on your parade, who's overly fearful, out of control, overly conscious? How do I approach that? And are there books or programs that parents can tune into so that they feel more comfortable opening that kind of a conversation with their kids or even their grandkids?
Are there resources? I'm sure there's a lot of resources. Every community in America is probably attached to a CADCA, community resource and prevention opportunities. There's as far as information and programs in schools and for parents, not as much as we need, and not enough to combat the amazing billion-dollar industry, multi-billion-dollar industry that tells you, just like you said, be a man and drink some alcohol, or or the movie industry where people share their pills, and there's no little consequences. We are the target. All of us are the target of very smart marketing approaches that that tell us that, drugs are normal, marijuana is healthy. Um, if you're anxious, take a Valium. So this is all around us. And yet we're seeing the consequences. So you asked, how do you approach that as an older person to a younger generation?
I know every good conversation with our kids and our
Yeah.
grandkids starts with "I love you." I
Oh,
love you.
that's beautiful.
I love you. And that's where this is coming from. If you think this is a hair on fire conversation where I'm going to give you unsolicited advice that you don't want, no. This is an "I love you" conversation. This is what people do when they show up and with their hearts and their foremost concerns, and they want to share something with you, not tell you what to do or impose what they believe on you, but to share something. So if it starts with an "I love you," let's say with the conversation you said about cannabis, I mean, nothing is getting more normalized right now publicly in this country than cannabis, than marijuana.
Hmm.
The legalization. What would we say after "I love you"? It's like there are some things I've learned and that I want to share with you. Number one, what would you say? about marijuana? That grandpa, I want to smoke some pot. All my friends smoke it.
Well, that's an interesting statement. There is a perception that everybody's smoking. But if we really look at the data, the majority of high school kids are not smoking. There's a perception out there like, hey, everyone's going to use drugs, so let's just teach them how to use it safely with harm reduction. But that's a wrong premise. Not all kids use drugs. There's plenty of kids who are not using drugs. It's not a biological need. I learned this from our friend Bob DuPont. It's not a biological need for us to use drugs, right? There's a biological, because people say, oh, well, kids are going to have sex anyway. Let's just teach them about safe sex. They're going to use drugs anyway. Let's just teach them about safe drugs. And there's no such thing these days with safe drugs. Drugs now are a Russian roulette for dying. Okay. In the 60s, maybe you could experiment with drugs. Today, with fentanyl, one pill can kill. One party is the last one you'll ever have in your entire life. So the lethality of it makes it really, really, it's been a game changer in perspective on how to do that.
The emergency room, are you no longer, you and the other doctors, no longer surprised when somebody who's been flirting with opioids comes in, or, either with brain damage, or comes in near dead, or you receive somebody who dies of a fentanyl overdose?
The ones who come to us are lucky. We just reviewed the medical examiner data that the amount of people dying from fentanyl prescriptions let me say that again. The people who are dying from fentanyl and the prescription drug use report card has tripled in the past 1 year. Tripled. If we look at the homeless population, it went up 5-fold. And these are not people who are necessarily what we call addicts. There are some people who are dying who are addicted, and some of them are just out thinking that they think they used cocaine. They think they bought a Xanax, and they end up dead. So if they come to me, they're lucky, and we got it down because because it's so common. We use the naloxone. We use naloxone drips where it's not just one dose or two doses, because the people fall asleep and wake up, and fentanyl is a respiratory death. People stop breathing, so we put them in the ICU on a continuous drip of naloxone, also known as Narcan, the opioid reversal agents, to keep people alive until it's completely out of their system.
So if you and I were doing a commercial right now, that started with, hey, if you're, 16 or 17 or 18 and thinking about flirting with one of those drugs, those sexy drugs you've heard about, cocaine, an opioid, what other drugs? If you've been thinking about flirting with Xanax, if you've been thinking about flirting with them, think twice, because
one pill can kill.
Yeah. Yep. And how would we explain that to them? These drugs are coming in from Mexico. These drugs are coming in from Northern California. They're laced with fentanyl, or
the drugs are coming from China.
China.
Yeah, the drugs are coming from China. They used to send the whole fentanyl from China across the border to Canada or Mexico and into the United States by mail, by boat, all sorts of different ways. And now from China, they don't even need to do that. They just do the precursors of fentanyl and ship the precursors to Mexico, and then the labs in Mexico are putting it together. Very lucrative, game.
And
Deadly game.
because you have spent, I think back to how do we all spend the last couple of years? Part of your last couple of years were in the White House. We're overseeing how all this works, and what assurances would you give us in terms of what's happening, or what the government is aware of and possibly going to do or has already done to curb the influx of fentanyl into our country and into our communities?
I did have the really amazing privilege of serving as the very first chief medical officer at the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy. It's part of the executive office of the president. And there are daily briefings on the numbers of medical consequences, mortalities, drug seizures, tracking from Homeland Security and National Security Council of where the drugs are coming um, from all parts of the border. So that intelligence is there. The question is, what drug policies are we passing that can put a stop to it? Um, and there is heavy emphasis on compassionate treatment for people who have an addiction, and billions of dollars now with the administration, and both administrations, from Trump to Biden, are putting in a lot of money and resources on the problem for treatment, and now we have harm reduction. But I would say we don't have enough on prevention.
We'll see. Yeah.
And the analogy I have with that is going back to tobacco. So when it took us 100 years before we realized the harms of tobacco, right? The pathologists were looking at these black lungs and saying, well, who said, the smoking caused that? That could have just happened, because there's a lot of pollution. And no one died of one puff of tobacco. That's ridiculous. And secondhand smoke, that's even more ridiculous. Whoever thought of that, right? And it took us 100 years to figure that out. But we figured it out, and we made a difference. And we made a difference that made a biggest impact is on prevention. Don't start in the first place. Yes, we have treatment for people who have an addiction to nicotine, and we help people compassionately who have an addiction to nicotine. But the way we really cut back lung cancer in our country from tobacco is prevention. And we did it again now with the opioid prescription epidemic. There was a push on the medical community to prescribe, and nobody should be in pain. Nobody died if they really have pain and they're taking opioids. That was false. Not true information that was pushed on the medical community. I'm one of those. I prescribed, as I was told, in the beginning of my career. But as I was working with the medical examiner and seeing how people died and talking to families whose children died, I realized this is, not the right way. That's really what prompted me to want to get to the White House. I felt like I could, really close the faucet on that with outreach to the medical community. And we did that. There's now really not a prescription opioid epidemic that's coming from the medical community. And we did that with prevention. Sure, we had patients, and there's still a lot of people who are on a bucket of medicines and need chronic opioids. That exists. But the way we stopped the epidemic of people dying is on the prevention side. And we need to do that with marijuana and other drugs. I have not met one patient who survived a fentanyl overdose that I talked to and asked them about their journey into drugs that didn't start with marijuana. Not one.
So, so you must be thinking every day, whether you're in the emergency room or out in front of an audience, masked and distanced, you must think every day or in your podcast about how we get that message out and what that message is. I mean, the thing you just said, that not one person who overdosed on fentanyl, has told you that it didn't start innocently with marijuana. So yeah, how do we educate? I've often heard that we need to tell people that 1 in every 8 people are predisposed. They are not going to be able to manage, one dose of marijuana, one joint, smoking in one joint, taking one opioid, one pill. That it's just a certain percentage of our population that are unlucky. They can't tolerate. They have no off switch. They have no pause button. what's a better, stronger message to be sending out that might just get picked up by the general public and make people more aware of the risks and consequences?
Well, I think it has to be come from a place of education and not judgment, right? Like saying, stop using drugs, that's not going to work. Or this is bad for you. I think it has to come from a point of education. And there's so many educational points that it's hard for me to really
Mm.
think which one works for a different audience. So if I was talking to you, Ken, and I thought, you're using marijuana, I'd say, well, do you know that it interacts with your medications? If you're on a blood thinner, then do you know that you shouldn't be taking that? Or do you know that, if you're an older male at risk of heart disease, do you know that it can cause heart attacks? And we have data to show that. So that may be, that audience. For younger people, I think the message is, you've given one brain. That's it. You have to protect it.
And
You
it's still
want to be as tall as you can. All kids want to grow tall, tall, tall. You wouldn't want to do anything to stunt the growth of your height because you want to be as tall as you can. Well, even after you stop getting to your maximum height, your brain is still growing years after. You stopped growing your bones when you're, 16 years old, but your brain is still growing 10 years after. Why would you want to stunt the growth of your brain? I think
beautifully.
so that kind of a different message.
And when the kids come up and say, but I'm so much less inhibited, when I drink 5 beers or when I take ecstasy, or what do you say? What do we say to them?
I think that's when I would need your expertise, Ken, as a psychologist, because if then you're escaping something, right? If you can't figure out a way to have fun, to be normal, to enjoy
Uninhibited, to let go
life,
a little. Yeah.
right? Without alcohol or drugs, then that's a problem, right?
Yep.
Then there's some other hole you're trying to fill. What is that you're filling? And my patients tell me that. They I had a very smart lady saying, she knows she needs to stop using marijuana. She's already been in the hospital multiple times before, and she's afraid of how she'll feel without it. And knowing that she needs to stop medically because of all the side effects that she's having, she'll have to now deal with the emotional
Yep.
pain that she was escaping by using drugs. And that is hard.
The way that I often explain it to people that I'm working with is to say, you skipped class when they were teaching coping skills, how to calm yourself, your anxious moments, your fears, how to disinhibit yourself a little bit, let go, not be as protective and distrusting. When they were teaching those classes, you were out of school, smoking weed or drinking beers or shots or whatever. And now this is time for you to learn those basic skills, how to communicate, how to have a constructive argument, how to really be forthright in the way you communicate what you want, what you need, how you feel, and to make a connection with another person. Because what you do when you're terrified to do that, in fear of doing that, is often turned towards, whether it's Ben and Jerry in the freezer who love you unconditionally and never say no, or you turn towards alcohol, or you turn towards your favorite drug, or whether it's a Xanax or whatever, or your habitual marijuana or whatever. And because you can't do that anymore, because the risks of doing that are so great and the return on investment is so dangerous, that you need to learn those skills. And often, I also point out that we don't live in a particularly literate society when it comes to teaching people how to let go without alcohol, without drugs.
We definitely have a very pill happy society, and we need a pill for everything, including for addiction and anxiety and sleep and everything. And And not that it's not beneficial. There's some people who do need that,
Yeah,
but like we learned with opiates, it's not the whole population,
yeah,
because then we get a disaster, and
yeah,
we're just now cleaning up the price of that disaster. And the
yeah.
same thing applies for for treatment of anxiety and insomnia and addiction.
Yes, yeah.
Not everything needs a drug.
I often tell people, it's the same thing that all of us need to do, whether we're addicted or alcoholic or whatever, get out in nature, listen to the heartbeat of nature and the earth, watch waves come in, go for a walk in the park you live in, exercise, stretch your bones, listen to music that's soothing, um, try new things, practice having conversations, open-ended conversations, practice listening, ask open-ended questions. And there are so many wonderful things we can do to build that infrastructure of coping and personal sense of security. And those are the kinds of things that I share.
I
But
think it's important for people to also understand what's happening in their body at the same time. So if you do have an addiction to a drug, your new normal of needing dopamine is different than mine. You need that just to get up in the morning and function. Um, and for you to get that new set point changed, takes a while, and it depends on how long you've been using and how much you're using and your genetics. But it could take a year for you to get back to a normal level. So what's happening to you while you're cutting back, while you're withdrawing and getting to a new normal, can be those symptoms: feeling anxious, not being able to sleep, change in appetite. That is can be resetting your normal. If you can get through that, that's what I tell my patients who are addicted to marijuana and need to quit for medical reasons. I tell them to expect withdrawal. And if they've been using since they're 12 years old and now they need to stop, it's not going to come easy. They're going to feel anxious. They're going to have trouble sleeping. And that's part of resetting their dopamine set point to
so,
a normal level.
so do we need to train more doctors or have better marketing campaigns about the dopamine effect for people who are grieving?
But addiction is very different as far as the surge of dopamine, and depends, marijuana is like for me, just my best day I've ever had in my life, my wedding day, my son is born, I'd have like, 30 dopamine units. A regular marijuana use for users is like 100. Methamphetamine is 1,000. That's what they need just to feel normal. And to get that back down um, takes again takes years. It's not something that's quick. Not that getting over grief is quick, but biologically it is different.
So people need to learn to recalibrate what enough is, a feeling of enough, and realize that their brain has been saturated with an artificial and unrealistic level of enough. And to aspire to that would create chaos. Is that a fair way to say it? Or how would you say it?
H- How to recalibrate?
Yeah, if somebody has taken a drug and they say, I can never forget how good I felt on that ecstasy or that Xanax
And at that
or
point, it's
whatever.
not how they're using the first times you use, you're doing it to feel that high, and you get called for it to feel that high. But as time goes on, you're avoiding the negative consequences. You're using it not to get high. You're using it just not to feel bad, like you're dying. And you have to do everything, and that's where we see even criminal activity, because people feel like they need it just to be alive. They need it like, water and air. That's how they feel. And it's not to get high, it's just to feel normal. And then the brain is just always thinking like, okay, how do I get my next one? And you're just focused on that.
Becomes the
Um,
central organizing principle of life, is to
right.
think about, where's my next hamburger coming from? Where's my next drink coming from? My next
And
dose, whatever.
that's the cycle of addiction that's been studied on a neurochemical basis and advertised by Dr. George Koob, who heads the National Institute on Alcohol and Alcohol Abuse. He came up, with that model, and that's how people think, and that's what brain chemistry shows.
Great. What else would you, and by the way, I want to do more of this. I don't want to squeeze everything. I know we only have a few more minutes, but I don't want to squeeze everything into this short. Can we do this again?
We could do this again.
Can
This
we do
is
a part
fun.
2 or part 3? Okay, let's do it
Absolutely.
again. So two questions. What other conversations do we need to have for somebody who's interested, they're curious, they want to take the next step, and they want to get some core information that they can go and get even more education, that they can feel more comfortable, more clear about everything that's going on in the world, the drugs we take. You talked before about the interaction with other drugs. Is there a conversation about interaction with supplements that we're taking? Because most of us are on supplements. We have no idea if they're interacting, whether we take them in the morning or the night, or, should we continue taking them if we have surgery, and so on.
You're saying you have so many points that we can chat about in just that question. Um, a source for great information on marijuana and harms is an organization I help found called the International Academy on the Science and Impact of Cannabis. This is a group of physicians and scientists who are educating on the harms of cannabis. And if you go to the website, isaac1.org, there's a library, and it's all medical library, with journal articles, but explained in a way that anybody can understand. So it has all sorts of different categories. If you could pick the one that you're interested in, you can click on cancer if that interests you, and you'll see, hey, cancer is increased twofold for testicular cancer. Simple statement. You can open up that link and it'll give you a little more information. And if you want more information, it gives you a link to the actual original medical publication. And there are thousands of this information, and it's categorized nicely if you want to find out about PTSD or addiction or suicide or pediatric use or cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. It's all the literature and information is there. That's one source.
That's wonderful.
Drug interactions, drugs.com is a common website, and you could put in all the medicines and supplements that you're taking and see if there's any interactions. The pharmacists have this resource, physicians have this resource, but the problem is people they go to different doctors, and one doctor doesn't always know what the other one is taking, and you're probably the best quarterback for your health and for all the different places that you're going to get medications. So if you stick to the same pharmacy, they have programs, but they don't know that you're also using cannabis or a supplement, so they can't check for those drug interactions. So you need to disclose that, and people can check for themselves, but it's really hard to interpret. You would need an expert to kind of help you figure that out.
I'm left with, and I want to hit one more, but I'm left with, every time we speak, I'm left with a feeling that thank you, Dr. Lev, because you are speaking to the issues of our time. Times have changed. The way we are has changed. The things that are now available, we have new choices to make, new things to learn. And every time I talk to you, I have hope that that's the direction we're moving in, not in the direction of hearsay and, oh, that sounded like a good idea, but solid thinking and decision making and conversations that we can have with each other, because that grassroots conversation, one person to another, is maybe one of the most important things that's going to educate the general public and prevent the kind of unnecessary suffering and losses that we suffer in addiction, in losing loved ones to fentanyl, in diluting the quality of our lives because we're doing things that we have no idea are hurting us, and so on. But what are the other conversations we should have when
Well,
we get?
I wanted one more thing you said, because you asked me about, oh, well, what about supplements?
Yes.
The one source that I can say about supplements is there's no regulation of supplements. So people can be buying CBD, but it actually has THC in it, or it has other toxins in it, unless there is a seal that that supplement went through a standards process. So if there is a USP seal on your vitamin E or vitamin C or your zinc or whatever people were buying to prevent COVID or anything else, if it has a seal, then you know that that's really vitamin E. Otherwise, it's a gamble, and there's no oversight into what you're buying and what's being sold unless it has that.
Great.
So that's just another source.
Can I encourage something?
Yeah.
All of the people that follow Dr. Lev and enjoyed this turnaround with me interviewing her, I'd love for you to feed back to Dr. Lev and her office. How was this for you? What are the conversations that you would like to hear her speak about more? Let's hear from the audience that's listening to this. What would be important for you to hear? What do you need to learn to improve the quality of your life and the safety, your own safety and your family's safety when it comes to the drugs we take? So I'll be excited to hear what comes back.
That's great. And I love a lot of questions.
I thank you so much for doing this and trusting me and trusting this process. And then we'll turn it around later and you can interview me.
That's been great. Thank you. Thank you, Ken. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to High Truths on Drugs and Addiction, where national experts give you facts and answer your questions. This week's episode would not be possible without the generous support from our sponsors. A sincere and warm thank you to CCR, Center for Community Research in San Diego, enhancing public health and safety through informed action. If you would like to sponsor a show, we would be honored and grateful. Please contact us on hightruths.com. We thank you for listening and hope you will help our rating by giving us 5 stars and subscribe so you won't miss any of our informed, packed weekly shows. Visit our website, hightruths.com, to submit a question, take a quiz, or download a free prescription for naloxone. Until next week, this is High Truths on Drugs and Addiction. Our producer is Dave Rivas from Davey Boy Productions. I am your host, Dr. Roneet Lev, and we hope we brought your day a little bit more high truths.